So I see those numbers kind of slowing down. So I will say hello again and welcome once again to the Art Museum of West Virginia University's Lunchtime Looks program. My name is Heather Harris, and I'm the museum's Educational Programs Manager, and I'm very happy to have you all here with us today. First, a couple of technical notes. Live captioning is available for this event, so you can avail yourself of that option by pressing the closed captioning button in your Zoom app, whether it's at the bottom or the top, it depends on the device you're using, but you can press CC and you'll get our live captioning. Also, at the end of today's discussion, we are going to have some time for question and answer. We are going to use the Q&A function rather than the chat function. So please avail yourselves of the Q&A. If you have questions as we go, please type them in there. I will be monitoring, and we will hopefully have a really good discussion as we continue the program. So now it is my pleasure to introduce our guest today, Andrea Modica. Ms. Modica's photographs have been exhibited internationally and are held in the collections of many major museums, including the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Museum of Modern Art, and the Whitney Museum of American Art. She is an MFA graduate of Yale University, a Guggenheim Fellow, and a Fulbright Scholar, among her many prestigious awards. 5 of her photographs from her January 1 series are currently on display in the Art Museum of WVU's exhibition In Conversation with Walker Evans for Photographers, which we hope you will book a ticket to come see while it is still on display here through April 25th. If you are able, you can do that through the museum's website and reserve a time so that you can see these pieces in person. I think it'll be very much worth your while. Now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to hand things over to Andrea, and thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you, Heather. And shall I, well, thank you everybody for being here, and a special thank you to Todd Tubutis, the curator of the show, for including me and for putting the show together. And also thank you, Walker and Dana, who introduced us 3 or 4 years back. And, you know, I just loved Todd immediately, and I'm so glad to have had this opportunity to work with you, Todd. And I want to welcome everybody. I don't usually have notes, but I've got some right now because I don't want to forget. Look, there's some good things about the Zoom system, and of course, some not such great things. I'd love to be able to see you, maybe see you fall asleep. I don't know, just see you, but I can't. But the good news is, I suppose, that some people can, instead of my going to West Virginia, leaving my Drexel students behind, I get to actually invite them to come today, as well as family and friends, colleagues, and alumni. So I thank you so much for joining us, and especially my students who get to see me sweat, because it never gets easy to talk about your work. And I do want to say a special happy birthday to my sister, Maria. Without Maria, I wouldn't be here. I was definitely raised by a village, and she was key in that village. So happy birthday, Mo. And then, of course, welcome everybody from the University of West Virginia. How great to have 2 groups of students converge for this event. And I'm going to keep the presentation fairly short, and with hopes that there are lots of questions, and that maybe even some discourse between the 2 groups. So let's see, where shall I start? I guess I'm going to start with sharing the screen. Certainly should know how to do this by now. And, you know, I was encouraged to show you around my place, but instead of dragging the computer around, I took a snapshot, actually not very long ago, about a half hour ago. You could see I'm still working on my presentation a half hour ago. And this is my studio. And that's in the center, a picture by Walker Evans, which has come with me everywhere that I've lived since 1982, when Richard Benson, my mentor at Yale, gave that to me. And it's a picture that I have 2 years for. One is 1935, but I believe that you guys have it listed as 36. So that right there, I find curious because Walker Evans was obviously, well, was he an influence for me? Was he an influence for all 4 of us in the show? I broached the subject with Lyle Rexer, with whom I just had a long conversation, and he said, "Oh, Walker Evans, he's the Rorschach for all photographers." And I thought, "Oh my goodness, it's true. I think we can all find something in his methods to feel an affinity towards." And one very obvious one for me is the view camera, and that's my view camera and the same size camera that he used to take this photograph in this slide. Also he did a lot of portraiture. But another thing that's key about Evans is, for me, is that the lines between doing assignment work and so-called personal work or artwork were very much blurred for him, as you can see from some of the pictures in the exhibition, Todd's exhibition. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But I do want to explain a bit about using that big camera by showing you some slides that of me working with the camera. In this case, I'm photographing Billie Jean King, who is a very strong personality, right? And somebody who I admire greatly. And I was very nervous on this shoot. And in fact, this picture was taken by a Drexel student who was my assistant, Mike Bucher, who's now an editor at the Wall Street Journal. So the camera's big. It demands slowing down. These are the film holders in the foreground. The picture needs to be set up. You have to just beg and pray that the person doesn't move. You shut the shutter of the lens, put the film holder in, take out a slide and take the picture. So there's a lot of kind of leading this situation towards some kind of comfort so the person can stay still. So here she is telling me what to do. And here I am, of course, telling her what to do, if you can only imagine what this felt like for me. But the camera demands a certain amount of collaboration. So in the end, this is the picture. But the camera also creates a need for the person to, well, I've already said this, to be still. So bringing in a lot of light. This is shot at a daylight studio called Sun Studios in New York, as well as on the left, you could see some bounced light, is creating a shorter exposure, and the person is tortured a little bit less. So, what we see from this picture, and I am no Walker Evans scholar. I just intuitively have taken what I need and what I want, and that changes over the years. But what we see is the picture that was chosen for the show, and you got to see this. I dug this up. I paid $7.50 for this book, so that's how old this is. But this is the catalog for the show that you've got. Of course, it's a reprint, and it's a very old book from the 70s. This is the picture right here, top left, that you've got in the show. And this picture is, evidence of the fact that at some point Evans chose this picture, because that's the one that he worked on, which is this negative, which is cropped down. So that got me thinking just today that a couple weeks ago, gosh, maybe 3 weeks ago, Larry Flint died. And I posted this picture that I had taken of him, probably about 10 years ago now. And that's important because I revisited that today because I was looking at outtakes after I saw this. And I thought, gosh, isn't that the better picture? So even, within 3 weeks, I'm like, I think this is the better picture. I made a mistake even after living with all of them for 12. I don't really live with them, but having them for 12 years, so we are guided, and maybe tomorrow I'll think another version is better. So we're guided by all kinds of things. And Evans went back to old negatives and brought them out years later. This is Anne Hathaway before. hair and makeup, and this is the one that they chose. So sometimes your editing when working for somebody else is not 100% yours. I mean, I'm fine with both pictures, but I prefer this photograph. And let's see. So if you know my work at all, you would probably know this work, Treadwell, which is all made with, by the way, everything I'm showing you is made with the 8x10 camera. And Walter Evans, of course, used every kind of camera. And Richard Benson told me, and I was floored. He said, I'm sure Walker Evans would have been a digital photographer. If he had had those tools. And I thought, my goodness, how would that change the meaning of his work? Wouldn't it though? So here we are. This is a photograph which was made the first day that I met a family of 21 people living in a house upstate New York, where I was teaching at SUNY Oneonta, my first job out of grad school. And of course, I stopped. There was this yard full of people, beautiful day. And I said, can I take your picture? They said, yes. I went to the car. I had just learned how to drive. I had my first car. And took out this big camera. And so the adults are holding the kids still. And so there you have it. The picture again becomes about something, which it would be something else had it been made with a small camera. Not better, not worse, just fundamentally different, which is why, of course, these could never be considered documentary photographs. Perhaps nothing could be considered a documentary photograph. So in this case, Barbara, my main character in my 15 years of work photographing this family, is holding a cat by its front paws up between her legs. And that was all Barbara's idea. So the photographic process is truly this dance, especially for me with the big camera, of kind of getting back to the picture of Billie Jean King, bossing people around and then having them tell you what they want to do, or, the world bringing a cat into the picture, which is in one sense a nightmare for an 8x10 photographer. I mean, it's very hard to wrangle a cat or reason with a cat. But Barbara had this idea that was so much better than anything I could have thought of. And that's why I keep going, because I'm not, building something alone as a photographer, but I'm living in the world and reacting to the world and taking from the world and having an intimate relationship with the world that is not permitted without the camera. I'll talk more about that when I show you the next bodies of work. So these are some photographs of Barbara made over the years, and her family. I'm looking to see if I have a clock, and I don't. And okay. And then, when you photograph one person over the course of many years, just as a practitioner, you are trying always to figure out ways to do it differently, which is why having a long-term project is a great concept if you're a young person. But I started this work when I was, 26 years old. And the thought of working on anything at that stage of my life for a year was unheard of. So when I tell my students, you've got a month, or my goodness, sometimes a whole term to do a project, I see sometimes their eyes fall out. But of course, it forces you to figure out different ways of making pictures and becoming a better photographer, one would hope. So these are the photographs made during the last year of Barbara's life. I could talk a long time about my 15 years with her, but we've got a lot to cover, and I promised you I'd keep it short. So Barbara did pass away with diabetes, complications from diabetes, and that really is what ended this project, sadly. And of course, more sadder than that is my relationship with her. But of course, during those 15 years, I was doing other things, right? I was teaching, I was going back and forth to Italy for the first time. I had a Fulbright, I lived there, I started photographing there. That's a relationship that continues to today. And you'll see some work from there at the end. And I started photographing the Oneonta Yankees, which was this farm team that came to Oneonta every summer, kind of took over the town, bigger than life, and were, in some ways completely compelling. I think those ways are quite obvious in this picture. And in some other ways, a little bit confusing to me. So there was maybe this demonstration of certain behaviors that I had not seen in a while, having gone to art school, like homophobia, sexism, racism, things like that. So I was at once deeply attracted to this subject and also confused by it. And that's a theme that is very much picked up in the work that's in the show at your museum in West Virginia. Okay, so I just kind of copy paste this thought as we go through. But photography gives me an opportunity to go someplace where I might be a little bit confused and really dig in, and also might just want to look and be able to stare and kind of, go at with like the knife and the fork of just kind of enjoying life fully. A kind of intimacy that really for me could not exist with strangers, basically, without the camera. This is Jorge Pasada, his first season as a catcher, actually his first season in professional baseball. And this is about 1990. And he had just been moved from the outfield to catcher. And I thought, oh my goodness, I liked him because he was kind. And for goodness sake, though, I thought poor Jorge has to like walk around with all this heavy stuff on. And I wanted to make a picture about that. Is it obvious yet? I care nothing about baseball. But this is a picture that I must say, for those of you who have never worked in a darkroom, this is a negative. It's this big. And I did what every photographer does with a negative, big or small, dripping with fixative. I held it up to the light bulb in my dark room, and I saw this vast area of overblown. I did everything that Kodak said not to do. I photographed right into the sun. You open up that little piece of paper that comes with the film, and they say, don't ever do that. And this is a picture that ended up on the cover of the New York Times Magazine, and really launched that career, bridging my fine art work, personal work, with more commercial work, editorial assignment work. Again, kind of going back to the point I was making in the beginning about, Walker Evans kind of dancing back and forth between both. And it's something that, although he had a great presence at Yale, and it was the professor of my first teachers, Jed Devine, as well. That system of crossing over between commercial and non-commercial was lost by the time I got to Yale. It was, let's say, frowned upon. So it's something that I bring to Drexel as much as I can, and really, really love teaching there, because it's a program that embraces really the fact that there can be no division between the two. So, this is a picture I took of Derek Jeter, his first week as a New York Yankee. And in fact, I was on assignment for Kathy Ryan in the New York Times Magazine. And I just thought I wanted to look at him. I didn't know he was nobody knew he was Derek Jeter, right? He was a kid. And this is a picture that, of course, now means something completely different, certainly from what it did for me at the time of taking the picture, and now in my body of work. On the other hand, while I was on assignment in Florida, I also went to Vero Beach and photographed at the Dodger spring training camp, and was asked to photograph Darryl Strawberry, who was in a lot of trouble at that time, and very, as opposed to Derek Jeter, kind of on the other side of his career. And he had one thing to tell me, which was to hurry up. So I must say that I probably wouldn't have photographed him in what I was considering, the real world, which was my personal project, but I was forced to photograph him because I accepted an assignment. So I made this picture, which led to many other assignments, and even my one of my favorite professional relationships, which was with Toni Morrison, and I ended up teaching with her at Princeton. So one thing really led to another. And I know that's probably a weird jump to make, but the editor of Vibe saw this picture and hired me to photograph Toni Morrison. So that's how that happened. So one thing always leads to another, but I want to move to the next little body work. Look, I've been doing this. Oh my goodness. I reread Jerry Thompson's intro in this book, this Walker Evans book. And, he mentioned that Walker Evans had a 45-year career. Oh my goodness. When I read that when I was 22 years old, I was like, that's somebody else, like that. I can't relate to that. Well, here I am, like 40 years into it. So my point is that I've got a lot of work, but I've kind of narrowed it down to the bodies of work that I think relate to the pictures in this show. What was happening with this baseball work is that the players started showing up together for pictures. Of course, I always brought pictures back, so they knew what I was doing. Even though they really didn't know what I was doing, because I didn't know what I was doing. And these two fellows showed up for a picture, and they're from very, very different backgrounds, yet they were friends. And in fact, they were the only two African-American players on the entire team. So that was curious to me, and that was something that definitely spills over into the next body of work. I'm very interested in, again, it's like the cat entering the picture. Like I might start out photographing a person, but if something else comes into the picture, it could be a person. I'm fascinated often by the choices that the world, that they're making. So these are three guys who I think look quite a lot alike, and in fact, they're all pitchers. And I didn't know that, and I didn't understand. I do now, that pitchers hang out together, especially at this level, that they have a strong bond. So that work is earlier on. A little bit more recently, I've been photographing best friends. I can say this, probably never having had children, my favorite age group is high school. That's my favorite age person, although I love college age kids too. So I went to different high schools and photographed best friends, kind of inspired by what happened with the baseball work, that people showed up together. But I didn't have any choice over who was going to be paired, and I was really curious about how some people, again, kind of looked alike, and some people looked radically different. Or in this case, of course, this shows you how old it is that they're sharing this ear thing. I saw them walking around the cafeteria, because I lived on this campus, this Loomis Chaffee, for a couple weeks as a resident artist, and I said, I got to photograph you too. And then most of this work ended up being in Italy, because I got a Anonymous was a woman grant, and was able to go there for the better, gosh, I think it might have been the better part of a year. I might have been on sabbatical for that. Anyway, so I photographed at an art school, a high school in Italy, and in Modena, and actually traded giving English lessons. So let me move along a little more quickly. So yeah, we'll get there. We're getting to the mummers real soon. So these are all from that high school in Modena. So the mummers, in fact, the group of men who are in this show are all called wenches. And that right there got my attention. And then I found out, of course, well, you wouldn't know this, but I moved to Philadelphia when I was hired to teach at Drexel. And that was, oh my goodness, maybe about 12, maybe 14 years ago now. And I heard about this thing that happened every January 1st, which is this parade called the Mummers Parade. And men, there's this faction called the Wenches, and they dress like, well, they wear dresses. So of course, with my art school background, ever so innocently, oh, are they, are they wearing dresses because they're like playing around with gender issues, or what is this about? It's this tradition that's gone on for generations and generations. These purportedly primarily straight men are wearing dresses one day a year and getting very drunk and having a big party. So so I said, well, this is really interesting. So I started going down to the place, which is in some ways the booziest of them all, which is the core of where most of them live, in South Philadelphia on 2nd Street. And so I wasn't really interested in the big parade, which is a big production. But these groups of wenches, they kind of hang out in their club bars, and then they'll come out and dance and join the parade. And I'm sure they do some other things I don't know about. But anyway, I would take them away from the parade or the partying and kind of isolate them, and take these pictures. And I say would because I would say this project's probably over, because it really ended with the pandemic this year when the parade was canceled. But this is 10 years of work, but it's only one day a year. So it's a 10-year, 10-day project. So that the children are, often wearing the dress that the father's worn. It's all boys. So I'm very much immediately an outsider in a very tight neighborhood. So that's the second thing about me that has me as an outsider. And then, of course, the third thing is that I'm completely sober when I'm taking these pictures. So again, it's very, very similar to the baseball work, that I'm coming as an outsider with the baseball players. I wasn't young. I was about 30. They were in there about 20. So I wasn't young enough to be a girlfriend. I wasn't old enough to be a mother. I obviously knew nothing about baseball. So we're all confused. I was confused. They were confused. The same with the mummers. So that's a good place for me to be when I'm taking pictures. And then when I'm less confused, I'm pretty much done. And I might be going on to something else. So this is a little boy with white painted on his face. So I have not included any of these pictures, but I will say that some of the mummers have been in trouble for using blackface. I'm not saying anything that is not absolutely known to the public, which of course is illegal. But I haven't included any of those. However, they're in the book. And what, of course, I found out by doing this project, as I did with the baseball project, that like any group of people, some are absolutely lovely and some are not. And in fact, this is a really lovely guy who's a graphic designer named Motorcycle Bob with his son. And the picture came about because it was 2018. It was really cold, if any of you remember New Year's Day 2018. It's the only time I've ever had my shutter freeze. And I want to take a picture of that little boy alone. And he was just shaking. I mean, he was just, he couldn't stay still. So his dad came in and put his arm around him, and in this most beautiful, loving gesture, which might be in conflict with what I may have perceived about him. So again, through photographing, the world has offered me information that I wouldn't have without the process of having photographed, if that makes sense. So moving on to the last body of work, which is not a body of work at all. I just want to run you through a collection of pictures that were put together in a book called As We Wait by Larry Fink. And it is really a very collaborative effort. I gave him, he said, I want to curate a book of your work. So I diligently, like a good Girl Scout, gave him, maybe 12 or 15 different folders of images from different projects. And it was as if he had taken them all and thrown them in the air and just kind of did a little dance and picked things up and put together this really incredible kind of collection of pictures from all different projects that have taught me a lot about my own work. For instance, this is a photograph of my years ago ex-husband there, the younger guy, in a hot tub. A picture I don't know if I would put this first in my book, but did I say ex-husband? But there it is, number one in the book. Picture of current lovely, long-term, fantastic boyfriend, right there next to the ex-husband. Longer ago, ex-boyfriend, right there in the book. So Larry put together a collection of pictures that he was seeing absolutely objectively. In fact, he thought all the guys were the same. A picture of a friend with her dog who was dying. A couple friends here in Philly. And I did a long-term project photographing a family-run slaughterhouse. I know this picture doesn't seem to have anything to do with that, but that's a whole other talk, 9 years of work. But some of those pictures showed up in this book. Family, friends, even a landscape. And finally, last image, a photograph which is going to be the cover of my next book, which is a project that I've been photographing at a horse clinic in Italy for probably 7 or 8 years now. And TIS is going to publish that this year. So I think I will unshare. Is that right, Heather?
Yeah, that sounds perfect. And I'm popping back onto the screen to help field questions. So if anyone, there was nothing that came up in the Q&A while you were talking, Andrea, but right now is the time. I'll kind of give people a moment to think. And also, Andrea and I were chatting before we started here, and we were talking about how nice it was that, some of her students from Drexel and perhaps some WVU students were here. So it might be interesting to get those perspectives. So if you do have a question and you wish to kind of identify yourself as either a student here at WVU or one at Drexel in that question, then maybe we could start a little bit of a dialogue, although I know it will be stilted based on rates of typing and ability to answer, but I'll go ahead and open that up now. So I'm popping the Q&A box up, and we don't have anything yet, Andrea. So I think I know.
I said it all. Should we?
You said it all. Oh wait, now they're coming rapid fire now. Then I was getting ready to throw you one to get us started, and now we have 3. So Stephen Perloff from the Photo Review asks, how has teaching and learning from your students affected what and how you photograph? So a great kind of kickoff to this idea of students tuning in from different institutions.
Oh, that's a great question, Stephen. Thank you. Okay. In fact, Paul and I were talking about this recently. There are some pictures that can only be made when you're just starting out. And we're kind of, as practitioners, always like chasing that feeling, it's the high. But we see our students produce some incredible work, which is just so inspiring and fun and moving. And so that's just the joy of it. But teaching puts me in a position of having to talk about photographs, and I don't work that way. I work very intuitively. I think, I have a thing or two that I can say about work after it's made, years after it's made, but not while I'm in the middle of it. That's not how I work. But so teaching forces me to be neck up in terms of photography. And I think that kind of thinking is useful and is on the back burner. I try not to keep it in my conscious mind when I'm shooting, but I think that I think it's made me a better photographer, and it's fun as hell.
Good. I'm glad that's the relationship we want to think about with teaching here at a teaching institution so fun as hell is always good. Carlos would like to know, when and why did you decide to pick up the 8x10? So you talk about its importance, from in your career, and maybe a little bit more about that choice, or how you got acquainted with the large format.
Yeah, I don't know if this is going to be a popular answer, but I'm going to say it anyway. I thought as a young person in college, taking my first elective with a 35 millimeter camera, that it was too much imagery, I wanted to almost say too easy, because I was studying painting and drawing and sculpture. And those were, my first major was painting. I mean, of course, like many college students, I hopped around a little bit, and I took an elective, and I thought, I'm not really quite getting why this is such, a big deal. Mind you, my pictures weren't any good. That's not the point. But I borrowed an 8x10 camera that we had at SUNY Purchase, and I felt an affinity to that, with like welding metal. I understood now. I felt like I was making something. It doesn't really make sense that if something's harder, maybe it's because it was harder. There were so many steps. But I realized in retrospect, the thing that really got my attention with that big camera, it happened with the big camera, is that I was photographing my friends, and they were looking different in the pictures than they did in real life. And it was that transformation that made me understand why photography was so hard, which is that we are not documenting the facts. We're actually transforming something. And that is a very powerful thing, and very, very difficult to navigate. Very complicated and frankly, very conceptual. So I thought very conceptually from the beginning with this big camera about how people behave in front of the camera. I understood that when I was photographing a friend, that that relationship was going to become part of the meaning, although not literal, right? It's really part of the process, as opposed to photographing a stranger, photographing somebody much older than I, which is harder to do now. But as a kid, photographing, my parent, for example, the whole power dynamic, how that changed when I had to be, giving instruction with the big camera. So the big camera, actually, I was most interested in it conceptually from the beginning. It's not that stuff can't happen with the small camera. I mean, the small camera has its own set of incredibly, wonderful advantages. You can jump around with that thing. You can move in, you can move out. I mean, you can, jump on the table. You can move fast. That was never my interest.
Thank you. So Janet, who is a friend of the museum, wanted you to talk a little bit more about this quote, "When I'm confused, I'm pretty much done." So she wanted you to just elaborate on that, or when I'm not confused. I'm sorry, when I'm no longer confused.
Yeah. I suppose that I gravitate toward subjects that put me a little bit off kilter. Not because I enjoy being off kilter, because for instance, in my friendships, I don't want that kind of confusion. In my love relationships, I want clarity. Like, I don't want, to like have to figure it all out all the time. Like, what did that mean? But in photography, at best, I'm really living in that confusion and on that edge of between, having taken control over that because I'm making a picture of it, and then being lost in what it's delivering to me. And I don't know. I just want to be there. I think there are a lot of people who probably don't want to be there. I don't want to be there every hour of my day, and I don't want to be there at work, for example. You know, I want that to be clear and not confusing. But photography is confusing. I mean, it should be. Otherwise, we should do something else, really, which is better understood, better respected, and better paid.
Fair enough. And we actually had another question about how have you navigated the world of photography as a woman? You talk a little bit about this discomfort of I'm thinking particularly of and this is me extrapolating from the question, but I'm thinking particularly of the minor league baseball players and the mummers in the January 1 series. You highlight that one of the ways you're an outsider in both of those contexts as a woman, but also within the kind of field of photography and other photographers who are men, how you've navigated that.
It's a really gigantic question. So I just don't know how to answer that quickly. I would love to be able to answer that quickly. And it's something that, like what image I think is the best, that changes, day to day. My memory is different from my experience, isn't it? When I was a young woman, I don't think I fully understood that was an advantage. And a disadvantage. I don't think I really paid much attention to either one of those things. But now that there's so much conversation around gender, I realize that there were challenges. Oh my goodness. But nothing stopped me. I mean, I think, first and foremost, that I tell my students, you have to know who you are. And I was definitely a woman, and you have to, on some level, like that. You have to love that. You have to take care of that. You have to, in the real world, not taking pictures, you have to nurture that person that you are by surrounding yourself, for example, with people who love you instead of people who want something from you. And that I think makes it possible to navigate all the stuff that's confusing and uncertain, which of course is, the art world, the gallery world, all of that. But I've had great mentors. I've had amazing, especially women, help me along the way. And I try to pass that on. But I don't, again, it's such a gigantic topic, especially as, things are changing in this conversation so rapidly.
Well, I appreciate you at least trying to give us a little insight into what we know is a giant question, not just in the world of photography, but the art world and more broadly. So thanks for that.
I said this off the cuff, but I think it's true. I didn't know that being a young woman was an advantage or a disadvantage, but I see both those things now in retrospect.
Yeah.
And now I think, young women are talking about it a lot more. Young men, young everybody, are talking about what's difficult about being X, Y, or Z, right? There's much more conversation. Of course, I was there for the initial, Gloria Steinem. I was a little bit young for that, but I remember it. So it's not like I was, completely naive, but I didn't, I don't think I used the advantage, and I know I didn't let the disadvantage stop me.
Well, thank you. We're glad that we see you. Sarah would like to know if all the images that we saw today were platinum or palladium prints, and on what surface.
Great question. I mean, that's a question, of course, I love to answer. Yes, every single one. Yep.
Okay, wonderful. Good. Yeah. And so Carl similarly asked, why do you only do contact prints. So again, some of these things about why is that an important part of your
Well,
practice?
this is something that's really different, isn't it? I'm thinking about Walker Evans and Richard Benson's really provocative comment about how he believed Evans would have embraced digital. For me, less is more. Like the more I change my equipment or lens, the easier in a way for me, the easier photography becomes. And I want to keep it difficult. I want to keep the challenge there. So, using one camera and one lens has been good for me. But Evans certainly did not do that. Now, what was your question? Because I think I missed it.
I've got to go back now. Now I've lost it. Oh, why only contact prints?
So same thing. So the way, it's just what I learned. It's what I fell in love with. And it's that slow process of everything I talked about in my presentation, waiting for the film to dry, looking at it with the light bulb, having a board of proof prints that looks like that, living with that, making a decision of what's worthy of platinum. And then, going in my bare feet into a dark room and working. If it's a dark room day, I jump out of bed. I'm happy. I love being there. And I got to say, I don't think I would have had that relationship with making images on a computer personally. But again, it's not better or worse. But remember, there's a relationship to photography for me still, to my time welding metal or putting paint on a canvas. As a very young painter, I loved stretching canvases. I loved gessoing and priming the canvas and getting everything ready. That was in some sense the grounding force behind the stuff that's really hard. And the 8x10 and the platinum printing constantly brings me back to earth. So I'm not just living in that confusing place of making pictures, which I love. And of course, it's uncomfortable.
Okay. And I think this might have already been answered by all of your talk about what you do and what you prefer. But Cindy would like to know if you ever make do color photography or make color photographs.
If somebody pays me. That's the short answer, and that's the truth. I've done it only on assignment. So in other words, I will do pretty much anything for money. My students know this. I really encourage it. But when you take money, you have to answer the problem. And I love that. To me, it's like one more facet of problem solving. And photography is all about problem solving. With the big camera, if you don't get the exposure right, okay, I don't print digitally. You got to throw out the negative. So if you don't make the client happy, it's like throwing out the negative. It's part of the bigger story. So, yes, I have shot color and I would do it again. Absolutely.
And I think that this question maybe feeds into that a little bit, because you talked about editors making choices like the Anne Hathaway picture that you've preferred versus the one that was ultimately chosen. So Rusty wants to know a little bit about composition and kind of what happens as you compose on with the camera, and then choices you make in the darkroom and choices that editors might make or change, sort of how composition might change in those three phases.
Composition, so like cropping?
I think that might be part of it. Yeah.
Oh, Rusty. Okay, thank you for that question. So I never crop because my prints are in contact. And I have to say, the best editors will not crop my pictures anyway. I don't know what they do with other people. I think they hire me knowing that that's part of my process. So I can't remember ever having a photograph cropped. So cropping is just not part of my world.
Okay. And then in terms of maybe other choices, because I want to make sure I'm getting to Rusty's full
Yeah.
question, maybe less of the cropping, but maybe you could talk about, especially with that 8x10 camera, how you're able to make some of these very nuanced, small compositional choices with that technology, and what kind of informs your work there.
So what have they, so what, the question is, what?
Well, I think he was asking about what happens with your composition as you're using the camera. So what are you thinking about as you're making composition?
Oh, okay, that goes back to Stephen Perloff's question about teaching and what teaching brings to my work. I do think that, as I said, because I articulate, I have to, with my students, what's happening with the edges of the frame, for example, and why it's not working or it is working. That's on the back burner for me, but I don't ever really, I try never to think about it consciously. When it does, my pictures usually get really stiff, so try to be more intuitive when I'm shooting. So in other words, if somebody's got, a logo, not a logo, but something about their outfit that's interesting to me, I will move in closer. It's that simple, like that. In other words, the subject will demand those choices.
Mm-hmm. Good. And so you try and be intuitive about it, I think is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Well, Kylie, who is a Drexel University alum,
Hey,
would
Kylie.
would like to know to speak about creating during the pandemic and what you've been doing and your recent work, and maybe how that's been affected by the current situation that we're all in.
Thank you, Kylie, for that question. So as Kylie knows, because she's helped me with this, I have a little book coming out with TIS of pandemic boxes, delivery boxes that were brought to my house during the pandemic. Also, I moved shortly before the pandemic and quarantine, so I was still unpacking. So that's all, that's here. I can just give you a glimpse. That's this work, and that book is going to be called 2020, and it looks sort of like an agenda, and each photograph is a picture of the thing, of the box on my driveway. Why is it outside? Because remember, in the beginning we're supposed to keep everything outside and not touch it, and then I would go unpack it and then just leave the box outside for a couple more days, unpack it with gloves. Remember all that? So that kind of that led to my continuing to do this and leaving boxes out there to weather. Why? Because I have a house and a driveway, and what fun that I can leave stuff on it without, anybody telling me I can't do that. So yeah, so that work, I think, goes back to some of maybe the conceptual approach to photography that I was most interested in initially, but it also, I think, in some funny way harkens back, and this could be a great way to sum up, to Walker Evans, who was a tremendous collector. And I was thinking about that because I think most of us photographers are in some sense a collector, right? We are collecting images from the world. We're collecting mummers. We're collecting skulls, whatever it is. I mean, my garage is like a collection of cardboard boxes, and Evans would famously photograph a sign and then go at it with his screwdriver and take the sign home, or at the end of his life photograph garbage, flip tops, for example, from cans, beer cans. Of course, the young people don't know what this is, and in gutters, take the picture and then collect them and bring them home. So there.
And
Kylie,
just as a follow-up on this current work, Tim wanted to know if the prints behind you were silver gelatin.
They are, I mean, this is the system, right? Negative to this, silver gelatin, to a platinum print. I mean, I could pull out a platinum print, but I actually gave a presentation last night, and I had platinum prints, I was like, well, this is useless because they looked so awful holding them up. But that's the next step. And they're printer on vellum. And well, you can see them at the museum. Are you at the museum?
Well, I am, but I'm not in the galleries though, so I can't.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Well,
So,
your students can see them at the museum,
yeah.
and my students can see them just by asking. When
There
we're
you go.
all in person again, which will be soon enough.
Yes. And I think, so we have a few more open questions, but I know you have a later engagement. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We're coming right up on 1 o'clock. So I will keep this chat here and can share it with Andrea if she has time to answer, then we can get you some answers. But I really appreciate everyone participating and asking some great questions, engaging in a little bit of dialogue, as stilted as it may be, through a Q&A function. And mostly I appreciate Andrea and your generosity of time and preparation for this presentation. We are so grateful to have you here today and to have your work on display in our gallery. So thank you very much.
I will stick around, but I just want to say, for those of you who want to pop off, I surely understand why. But thank you again for coming. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Wonderful. All right. So Andrea, did you want me to throw you these last couple questions in case the people are still on, or do you need to scurry off?
I'm here.
You're here. Okay. So Neil wants to know what your relation to Pine Plains, New York is.
Oh, my niece lives there, and her daughter. So I and her husband, for goodness sake. So I go there frequently enough. I mean, not frequently enough. I wish I could go more frequently. But yes, I photograph there a lot.
So that was an easy answer there. And then Lisa wants to know if you use a different camera, and you kind of talked about how you always use the 8x10, but kind of every day, she says, for everyday personal work. So I don't know if she means just kind of capturing your life, maybe outside.
I see. I got that. You know, God, I got a lot of texts. Thank you. Friends and family. Yay. Got the phone. In fact, that picture I just threw up there of my studio, of course, I took on the phone.
Yeah.
I mean, I am still part of this world.
Well, and that is one thing we talk about when we go through the exhibition with students, and really, what a different world looks like 80 years later, where everyone does have high-powered cameras in their pockets, and kind of thinking about, even though you still have the option to make photographs the way that you're making them and the way that Walker Evans did, there's also a very different relationship to photographs and kind of our ability to take them. So I'll go through these last couple.
Sure.
So Tom wants to know about, and I want to make sure I understand this question. This is partially why I didn't do it earlier. Talk about precedents and inspirations for your aesthetic use of tilts and shifts as opposed to their use as a corrective tool.
Oh, I didn't know that they could be used as a corrective tool. Truly, I'm joking, but I never studied the view camera. So for me, it's always been kind of like a box with a hole in it. And then I started moving things around and going, oh, look at that. I think that it probably happened when Barbara was sick in bed for the better part of a year before she passed. And I spent a lot of time with her, of course, not taking pictures, but also taking those last couple pictures I showed you. And she was sleeping for much of it. So I was depending more on the camera than I was on this idea that I've been talking about all along, about the world presenting information to me. And that's when I started really pushing the movements of the camera.
Okay, I think that makes sense. And in some ways, that's still the world demanding it, right? Because as your subject is.
Absolutely.
So,
good point.
Wonderful. Okay, so Atticus Berry, who is a Drexel alum, first says that he loves your hair. So that's the first comment.
Oh my goodness, my family is probably plotting because they haven't seen me. This is the pandemic hair, but it's staying.
Yes. No, well, mine is so long out of frame because I haven't had a haircut the whole time. So totally understand.
Thank you,
Um,
Atticus.
but getting to Atticus's question, and again, this is one I'm going to read because it's a little more complex. I was wondering how you work to choose final edits when you are working with a gallery or publisher. You mentioned how one publisher you worked with seemed to throw your work up in the air and arrange them as they fell in a way you might not have thought to put them together. How do you approach a more collaborative work process?
So I usually, Atticus, if I have a show or even a book, I've been very lucky to have very good people putting those things together. So I choose more than 90% of the time to let them do their job. So I've done my job and I've made the pictures and here's the box and go have fun. This last book that I worked with and Kylie helped me with on these pandemic boxes, on the other hand, it was really important to me that they were sequenced the way that they were and that they were titled. And even the book is a very small book, but it's designed again to kind of resemble an agenda. So I think more and more I'm thinking about the book as the object because the gallery world has changed so much. So I'm thinking more about having a hand in the design of the book, which Atticus, you've experienced more than I have actually with your book last year. So I tend to leave it to the other person, but I just want to clarify that experience of the folders in the air and all that, that was Larry Fink, who is a working artist, who is, a mentor to me. I mean, he's, been around, he's somebody's work I studied when I was in school and I adore him personally. And I trust him completely. And it was a gift because what happened from that experience is that I started looking at my work differently. And that's the best thing. And Atticus, you are in training to become a curator. You're going to be giving this gift to other people, which is that they are going to see their work differently as a result of your brains and your intuition and your hard work. That's an incredible thing that you're going to be passing on. And that's been my experience at best. And even, when there's a commercial aspect to it, like the Anne Hathaway picture, that of course had to do with selling magazines. Notice the image that they picked, she's looking at the camera. The image that I think is better, she's looking down, but they want to sell magazines and magazines will sell more if the person who's being highlighted is looking at the viewer, especially if it's on a cover.
That makes sense. All right.
Something I learned doing this kind of work.
So Max, a fellow SUNY Purchase alumni, wonders, what are some photo books you think are essential for any portrait photographer's collection?
Oh,
also, second part question, do you prefer to present your work in a book or on a wall?
Oh, God, those are two gigantic questions. I mean, we're talking about the history of photography. Also, Max, gosh, I wonder who you are. It maybe depends on the kind of work somebody is doing or what they're interested in. For me, it's Evans was important. Maybe August Sander is a really important starting point for somebody who uses a big camera and photographs people, because he so brilliantly managed over and over again to take pictures of people with a very slow process, because it was a long time ago, where the people look like they are stopped in motion, or actually there's just blood running through their bodies. They're not a butterfly pinned on a wall, as is often the case with much older view camera work. Oh my goodness, so many. Julie Margaret Cameron. I love the relationship of gesture in between characters in Helen Levitt. up through more contemporary, the view camera photographers that I can think of, Linda Connor, Lois Connor, obviously Sally Mann, Judith Joy Ross, Where Are the Men? Let's see, there's some in there too. Oh my God, Richard Rinaldi, Alex Soth. I'm talking about the big camera people, right? Greg Miller. I could go on. So those are peers whose work I continue to look at. There are many, many, many more. Oh my God, I'm sure I'm leaving somebody out, like my best friend who's going to be.
I'm throwing you the most complicated questions at the end. But
I mean, I feel like how really is the answer that interesting? It's almost like just, oh, I don't know. I mean, there's so many. You just got to open up the history of photography book, right? But probably the most important thing is just that little core of your people, who you can bounce off of, and look at their process. That's really probably the most amazing, like looking through piles of outtakes by, I won't name names, but some famous photographer, and go, oh wow, you got as many bad pictures as I did this year. And that's kind of like, that's what it takes. So that's why I think having peers is so important, to talk about the process and to feel, part of a community, and also just feel connected. I'm going off the rails here a little bit. There was another part of this question.
Oh, do you prefer to show your work on a wall or in a book?
Oh, okay. I think that's a little bit easier to answer. I love showing my prints because I'm a print object-based person first and foremost. But that world is often connected with commerce. So I've had a lot of shows, and I've really loved that, and I'm not quite so ensconced in the gallery world right now, and getting more and more ensconced in the book world. So right now I'm really excited about books, and that's a gigantic conversation. I mean, gigantic, about the book world. I mean, and how rapidly that's changed. So one of my first books, Treadwell, was, for example, printed in an edition of 5,000. And my newest books are being, printed in an edition of 250 or 500. And most often they're sold out before paper hits, ink hits paper. So, so I'm telling you a lot of information. I'm giving you a lot of stuff here. What part of it you want to hear more about? I love the book world. I'm in the book world now more than the wall world, but I still make prints. But yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. And then Jennifer would like to know, what drew you to photograph at the horse clinic?
Really? You want that story?
Okay. Sounds like it. Sounds like that's what Jennifer wants.
Okay. So I think, did I already say this? My partner is in Italy. So I go back and forth to Italy, although not this year, sadly. And we were having dinner at his friend's house, and his friend is a world-renowned horse surgeon and an artist, and a really good artist. And so he has this clinic, which is near his apartment where we were having dinner. And his studio is on top of the operating rooms, right? The theaters, there he calls them. And so after dinner, in a boozy state, we make our way over to his studio to look at his art. And of course, what do I want to see? I want to see the operating room for a horse. Who wouldn't want to see that? Good Lord. So that was interesting enough, an operating table for a horse. But then we were walking out, and incidentally, there are these boxes where the horses are recovered, where they recover. They weren't in there, but they're recovery rooms where after the horse has its operation, she are brought into this room, and that's a scene, let me tell you, moving a horse who's sleeping into these rooms to recover. So with the 8x10 camera, I said, Fabio, you please let me photograph this, because it's such a stupid thing to photograph with the 8x10. I mean, it's insane, really. Again, I'm sure Walker Evans wouldn't, if he had digital, he'd be like, why are you doing this? But I did, because I think the adrenaline rush of photographing difficult subjects with that big camera. Actually, I confess, there's a little bit of that. So photographing a horse, of course, the doors, you got to see the pictures to understand this. Do I have anything here? Not a thing, nothing to show you. Anyway, they're sleeping for like 5 to 15 minutes. And the minute like a little ear starts moving, the doctor like slams close the door, because, that horse has just had an operation. He's not in a good mood. So did I answer your question? Because of course I'm really excited about that work, but I didn't show it to you. So I feel odd talking about it, but that's my story about how I got there. I mean, who wouldn't want to photograph that? That's pretty much my answer. Like, if you were shown that place as a photographer, you'd be pulling your camera out, I think.
And I think that is a tremendous way to actually wrap up. Our last comment was another one from Neil, who was that New York connection, and said just a thanks and how much he loved your discussion. And I think that's also a perfect way to end. Thankfulness and gratitude, and also just that adrenaline rush that you describe, I think is really important for our young photographers and students at both institutions to hear. And I really appreciate you sharing it with us today, Andrea.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you.